Now, what's the darkness I allude to in the title? Believers at the time of their conversion, or in their younger years, tend to feel a great warmth during their moments of prayer. Psalm 34, taste and see that the Lord is sweet. But when they become adults, childish pleasures are taken from them, at least often. And they feel abandoned in a desert, devoid of feeling. They don't have those warm feelings anymore. Even when they try to be faithful at their prayers, at their church services. They look for God, and no one appears. They cry out, and no one replies. Even Mother Teresa in her new writings that have been published shows that she went through that for 50 years. Mother Teresa, of all people, couldn't find God. Didn't mean she doubted about God. Well, sometimes she did, but mostly she didn't. It just was dark. And this is reported in the scriptures in the early ages of Christianity and Judaism for sure. It's the natural adult progress of faith in the individual. For this reason, God is not on the same wavelength as our senses. He's not there to touch, or to see, or to hear, or to taste, or to smell. I mean, our senses just go blank. Even our imaginations can't envelop God. For little children it can. If you ask them, little children will draw you a picture of God. My mother used to clip these little cuttings from the Catholic Digest and other religious journals that gave quotations from parish bulletins. And in one of them, tears would be streaming down her face when she read these things. She would read them at family dinners when we all assembled. It's a little ritual. And the one I remember goes like this. Let's see if I can find it here. A nun teaching third grade asks her class, "Where is God?" Now, when I was young, we had a catechism answer to that, just like that. That's gone. Where is God? A little girl waved her hand energetically. "Helen." The nun nodded and the girl rushed ahead. "God is in our bathroom." "Helen," exclaimed the shocked nun. Helen fearlessly explained, "Well, every morning when my sister and I are in the bathroom, my dad knocks loud and says, 'God, are you still in there?'" But as adults, when we come to know God, we can only do so by a knowledge of unseen. There's one great author put it about the 14th century, the cloud of unknowing. It's knowing, but it's unknowing. Meaning God is on a different frequency. If we ever saw him directly, our circuits would explode. We can't cope with it. So it's a kind of clouded, screened off knowing, but it's no less certain. This knowing is not the same as doubt. Now, when you have it long enough, you may begin to doubt yourself. But that's a different moment. Just the unknowing itself is painful. It's not born of confusion or uncertainty or partial ignorance. It's a real knowledge, a certain knowledge, tested by long experience. Knowledge one would die for rather than be unfaithful to. It's a most practical kind of knowledge. You know, it's not a scientific theory. It's a practical kind of knowledge, worth trusting one's life to. Now, one of the ways, I'm really skipping terribly in this part, but I want to move to the main part of the lecture. One of the ways in which this knowledge of God became evident in the 20th century, and I'm sure is still continuing in some places, was in the interrogation rooms of the Nazis and the communists. Many who went to prison then thought of themselves as atheists or agnostics, not as believers. But when they were tortured, they felt compelled not to agree to sign and be complicit in a lie. They were offered papers to sign, or even just give testimony caught on tape. And they couldn't allow themselves to do that. Even though, as their interrogators said, who will ever know? We got volumes of this stuff. It'll go into a file. We got hundreds of thousands of files like that. What does it matter to you? And somehow they just couldn't bring themselves to lie. It was important to resist. And when they asked themselves how or why, some of them reflected in this way. Not all, but some of them reflected in this way. It's my conscience. And then they started to think, you know, it's not my conscience. It's as though I'm in the presence of a conscience that I can't let down. Because everything about me is underpaid. I feel pain in every part of myself, even in my conscience is confused. And still I know I have to be faithful to that light. And that's when they began to think that that light in them, it's their conscience yet, yes, in a smaller form of light, but behind that a much larger form of light, in which they were participating, and with whom they could not bring themselves to break faith. They could come close, they could be destroyed, their minds could be destroyed, their bodies could be destroyed, often were. But as long as they were conscious, they would resist. And this in turn gave them the power to resist. I was just reading the memoirs of one of the prisoners of war in North Vietnam. You can't believe the daily beatings that they took, and the diabolical tortures, and the various kinds of pain administered, and over years. And when they weren't being tortured, they could hear the screams of their buddies being tortured in a room down the way. And they were meant to hear them. And they were put in solitary so they get no reinforcement from one another, no sense of community. They did everything they could to destroy their sense of being loyal to one another. Well, anyway, that being driven toward an inner light strong enough to command one's own inner life, I think something like that is present in science, where a scientific researcher is determined not to fudge his findings. The experiment may not come out exactly the way he wants. Well, he doesn't try to bluff it, knowing nobody else is going to reproduce this experiment for quite a while. But he goes back and does it again. You can't have science without that commitment to a light greater than any of us, and a duty greater than any of us. Well, I just wanted to give you a taste of what I mean by this darkness. And atheists share, they have their moments under the sky with the wind on their face and the stars above them, in which they have to ask, who am I? Who are we? And what may we hope for? And what should we do? Life is painfully short. And one has to make an interpretation of oneself. Sometimes the new atheists say, it's up to the believers to prove there's a God. I think that's crazy. It's up to you to decide who you are. And to read the evidence that's right in your own experience correctly. If you get it wrong, if you think you're nothing but a bag of material, what Steven Pinker does at Harvard, I don't think he does, but that's what he writes. Then he has to think, does he really mean a bag of material like those bodies at Dachau and people tossed onto trucks like sacks of sand or off them? I don't think he means that. And I don't think he can explain the way his own mind works. At least not by any crude materials. And so on and so forth.